Hey everybody, this is a video of my Interlocked Marble Race puzzle. It's a mechanical version of the Prisoner's Dilemma and a concept from game theory. You can read the PDF document and all the details at my webpage at greglondon.com/IMR, but this was intended to be a quick video intro of the puzzle and how it compares to the Prisoner's Dilemma. So Prisoner's Dilemma is a pretty common thing in game theory, pretty popular, pretty well known, and I just wanted to do a quick review of it. The idea behind the Prisoner's Dilemma is that Alice and Bob both get picked up by the police on some minor crime. The police believe they were involved in a bigger crime, so the police offer them a deal. If one of them will testify against the other, if whoever does that first, they will immediately go free. So if Alice betrays Bob and rats on him, then Alice gets to go free immediately, and Bob will go to jail for 3 years for the more significant crime. If Bob betrays Alice first and Alice is silent, then Bob gets to go free immediately, and Alice gets 3 years in prison. If they both betray, they both end up with 2 years in prison, and if they both remain silent, then they both get 1 year. One of the issues around the Prisoner's Dilemma is that a lot of people will argue that if Alice and Bob are totally selfish, then the thing that they should do is they should both remain silent. But the way the payoff matrix works is that if Alice assumes Bob is going to remain silent, then she has a bigger incentive to betray him because she'll end up getting to go free immediately. So although both together get 1 year if they're both silent, the whole point of the payoff matrix is that if either one of them betrays the other, then they get to go free immediately, and then that individual is better off, even though as a whole, there's 3 years of prison versus just 1 each. So it's the difference between a selfish decision and a moral decision. So one of the things I wanted to do is I wanted to remove this payoff matrix, and I wanted to remove the narrative that is the police and replace it with something mechanical. So the narrative is basically you go to the carnival and spend $50 to buy yourself a ticket, and as you're walking around in the carnival, a carny man pulls you over and says you've just been randomly selected to play the Interlocked Marble Race, and basically he shows you the board and it looks something like this. You get a marble, and another player who was randomly selected gets a marble, and you don't get to see the other player, and you don't know who the other player is. You were both randomly selected. You both have a selector. So player 1 has a selector here, which is either in the up or down position, and that will affect which way their marble will go off of their start position. And player 2, he has a selector, and then that will either be up or down, and that'll control where their marble gets to go through their track. Both players have to select their position up or down without knowing what the other player is selecting. So both players have to blindly select up or down and then release the marble, and then their marble will follow whatever track it follows based off of their selection and the other player's selection. And then each player's marble will end up in one of the endpoints, which will then determine what prize they get. One of the differences, narratively speaking, is that in the marble race, the prizes are positive, so you want to maximize the number, you want the biggest number, whereas in the Prisoner's Dilemma, the outcomes are negative, so you want to minimize. But either way, in either case, the Prisoner's Dilemma or in the Interlocked Marble Race, the issue is the same in that you end up choosing the second worst possible outcome. So in the Interlocked Marble Race, basically the betrayal position is up. So player 1 will pick up, player 2 will pick up, and for player 1, the marble will follow this track and end up at the 10 position. For player 2, the up position will end up following this track and end up at the $10 prize. So if they both select up, they both win $10, which is, of all the possible outcomes, 0, 10, 20, and 30, 10 is the second worst possible outcome. If both of them select the down position, then that's basically the cooperate position, and player 1 his marble will follow this track and end up at the $20 prize, and player 2, his marble will follow this track and up at the $20 prize. So if both people cooperate, they both get a better prize than if both people betray. The problem is if both people cooperate, then both players have an incentive to betray the other. So if player 1 cooperates, then player 2 has a bigger incentive to betray, because in the cooperate mode he'll get $20, but in the betray mode he'll get $30. So that's the big part of the dilemma, and the prisoner's dilemma is that if you look at it from what both players should do, if both players cooperate, then both players get the second best prize. They both get $20. But the problem is that if you cooperate, the other player has an even bigger incentive to betray you, and they'll get the $30 prize, and then it just happens to suck for you because you end up getting 0. So the dilemma is basically that if you're looking out for your best self-interest, you have to use the betray position or the up position, which then ends up getting both players $10, which is the second worst possible outcome. One of the training lessons of the prisoner's dilemma is to show that when two players are acting in a purely selfish mode, they don't always end up with the best possible outcome. That's basically the promise of laissez-faire. As an example, laissez-faire says that if you have two selfish people, or even an entire economy of selfish people, and if you let them, without regulations and other hindrance, if you let them be selfish, then they will automatically and naturally come up with the best possible outcomes. But the prisoner's dilemma and the interlocked marble race both are examples where it shows that two players acting selfishly end up with the second worst possible outcome, basically the $10 outcome in the marble race. So one of the advantages, I think, of having it in a mechanical form is that you can look at it from the point of view of the switches here. So player 1 basically has either the up or down position to choose from, and that basically means that they get to choose from either the $10, $30 prize, or he can choose the $0, $20 prize. Now if you have a choice between 10 and 30 or 0 and 20, and your goal is to maximize your prize, you're going to choose the 10/30. The second player basically has the same choice, so they can either choose the 0/20 option, or they can choose the 10/30 option, and if they're going to try to maximize their prize, they're going to end up choosing the 10/30. But since both players are incentivized to do that, both players end up getting the $10 prize, which is, again, the second worst possible outcome. The Other thing about the marble race that I believe makes things a little bit more clear is that by removing the police and by replacing them with mechanical switches, it becomes a little bit more clear the interactions that occur, because you can then see that player 1's selection has an effect on player 2's outcome, and player 2's selection has an effect on player 1's outcome, and how that works. In the Prisoner's Dilemma narrative, it's just a story problem that the police enforce a certain outcome. But by replacing the police with switches, it's mechanical. It's something you can kind of just hold in your hands and feel, but it's also kind of demonstrates how complicated the problem actually is, because to model the police with mechanical switches, you need 6 switches. You need one for the player 2 selector, and then 2 more for the player 1 secondary effect. And you need 1 switch for the player 1 selector, and then you need 2 more for the player 2 secondary effect. So you end up having you need a total of 6 switches to create basically the functionality that the police provide in the Prisoner Dilemma narrative. So by making it mechanical, it becomes more obvious what the effects are, and it also kind of makes it a little bit more obvious that this really is kind of a complicated problem. One of the other differences, I believe, is that in the Prisoner's Dilemma narrative, the 2 players aren't specifically stated to know each other or not. It's usually kind of implied that they know who the other prisoner is. And that has intuitive consequences, because if Alice and Bob know each other, if both players know each other, then both players know from their outcome, if player 1 tries to cooperate and he ends up getting an outcome of 0, then he knows that player 2 betrayed him. And if both the players know each other, then that means that the first player who got betrayed, he could conceivably hunt down the second player and go beat him up. At which point, you're not playing a single iteration Prisoner's Dilemma based off of the payoff matrix that's given in the story problem. What you're actually doing is you're playing a 2-iteration game, where the first iteration you have the payoff matrix, and in the second iteration you have the player who was betrayed goes and beats up the second player, and the first player ends up getting a 0 prize, but then he gets the satisfaction that comes with getting vengeance on the second player, and the second player gets the $30 prize, which is great, but you'll have to subtract off the pain and suffering that the first player is going to inflict on him. So I think it's important in the Interlocked Marble Race that the narrative describe explicitly the fact that neither player knows each other. Neither player ever knows who the other player is. The players are randomly selected. Once you play, your ticket is actually punched by the Carney Man, so you can't play it again. And you basically get to choose cooperate or betray, and you get your award, your prize, and then you walk away and you have no other interaction with the other player ever again. So you're making your choice based off of the assumption that the other player is going to try to maximize their profit, and you're going to try to maximize your profit. So you're trying to get the biggest prize possible, and the other player is too, so you're going to choose between 1030 and 020, and the best choice is 1030, because if you choose 020 to try to get the 20, the other player again can instead of choosing 0, 20 as well, so they both get 20, the other player could choose the 0, 30 and get the $30 prize. So if you try to go for the 0, 20, the other player gets an even bigger incentive, gets the $30 prize if they choose to betray you. So you're both incentivized to choose 1030, and you both end up with the $10 prize. And that's basically the prisoner's dilemma. That's the dilemma of it, that two players trying to get the best outcome end up with the second worst outcome possible. The point of the interlocked marble race, again, is just to make it mechanically clear, so you can actually see the problem, see the choices, and see the effects of the different choices, and then also see the interconnection between what one player is choosing and how it affects the other player. So what player 2 chooses and how it affects the other player. And I think lastly, the kind of interesting to me is basically that each player, if you look at this mechanical system, there's 6 switches on it, but each player has only one switch that will control the outcome of their marble. All the other switches are either out of their control or have no effect on their marble. So player 1 can choose up or down, and basically this switch is the one thing that they can control that affects their marble. They can't control these switches because they're controlled by player 2, and they really don't care about these switches because these switches don't affect their marble at all. So basically the amount of control that the player has is one switch out of the whole 6. Same with the player 2. It basically they can control one switch out of all 6. This one switch is the only thing they can control that actually affects their marble. Like I said, the complete document and the text description and all that stuff is at my website, craiglennon.com/IMR. There's also STL files, so if you want to, you could print out the 3D print the 2 components here, or the 3 components. There's basically a base unit, and then there's 2 sliders. These are the same STL file, but I just use different color plastic to make it clear where the pieces are. And I believe that, or hope that, with the mechanical configuration and with a narrative that maps more directly to the payoff matrix, that the interlocked marble race makes the dilemma a little bit easier to understand. I believe the prisoner's dilemma has a narrative which isn't clear and kind of implies that the players know each other. So then there's, an implication intuitively that there's going to be a second iteration, and also the functionality of the police is kind of hidden in the story problem versus making it clear in the mechanical system. So hopefully this will make it a little bit clearer and a little bit easier for people to understand the dilemma in the prisoner's dilemma. Thanks for watching.